Just introductions off the start. Ed Woolley and Company. I'm your neighbor across the road. Not that any of you are over there probably right now. Brant looks like he's in the mountains somewhere, and Steve's in a hot tub. So two people in better places than us. Okay. Welcome. I've been asked to do a little session on Indian land conveyancing. And so I was thinking I was going to go through the general overview, a couple of things specifically for realtors to look out for in this process, and then open it up to any questions, which hopefully I can answer for you. Okay. This is becoming something that is a bit more of a relevant area to know for realtors, just because of when they changed the Real Estate Act and regulations with regards to dual representation. My experience in the past was most realtors did not want to have anything to do with Indian land in the past. And so we ended up with one or two realtors that did it all, and we're often on both sides. A good example would be Parker Cove and Don Taylor. I think 90% of the time we had Don on both for the purchaser and the seller. And then things opened up. Okay, with regards to the no longer allowing dual representation, we've got a need all of a sudden we need other realtors to be involved in the process. And I think we've got a lot more, and they're seeing the opportunities out there because there is a fair amount of Indian land, and it's quite popular because it is probably the last affordable housing that you're going to find in the Okanagan. Okay. Not a lot of places you can get a house near a lake and be in the $300,000 to $400,000 range, sort of thing. So it's very popular, especially with, I'm finding retirees from Vancouver who are selling their $1 million homes and deciding to retire on the equity from their house by buying something for $300,000 in the Okanagan and living the Okanagan lifestyle. Why they wouldn't do it, I wouldn't, it's hard to say. So we're seeing a lot of that coming through. That's one of the most popular places. Before it was Alberta summer people. Now it's Vancouver, I say, is where I'm seeing most of the people flowing from. So I just wanted to go over nature of Indian land, how the leases are structured, where they get their power from briefly, and things to look for in writing up the contract of purchase and sale, and then just go through what happens after you've done that and it reaches my office. Okay. And again, at the end, if you have a question with regards to something, let me know. Okay. If I'm talking about something and you have a question and I seem to be moving off of that topic and not answering the question that you had, feel free to interrupt, wave me down. Okay. So Indian land, okay, and just to make sure we're not offending people here, it is actually Indian, okay? That's how the act is written. And so it's the Indian Land Registry. So it's not First Nations, it's not Aboriginal, it's not any of these things here. It is legally, technically Indian land. And that's probably never going to change because it would require a constitutional amendment of some sort, and that those things never happen. Okay. So I'm going to be using the word Indian throughout, and I hope I don't offend anybody because I'm just using the technical legal term. Okay. The Indian land is technically crown land. Okay, it is owned by His Majesty the King in right of Canada, federal crown land. And I say His Majesty, you're going to see every document probably for a while saying Her Majesty the Queen, because it's going to take them forever to change all the forms. And so I actually had one form come through the other day that said His Majesty the King. That's the first I saw. And that was only about last week that I saw it. So we will see. But anyways, it's federal land, okay, that is managed by the federal government or under His Majesty the King. The First Nations don't actually own their land. They have a package of rights under the Indian Act with regard to that land. Okay. But the federal government is big brother and is looking after them under the Indian Act. Okay. Whether they like it or not. And they don't usually. Okay. But again, need a constitutional amendment if anybody wants to change that. So in the meantime, if you're dealing with a federal lease, which is what I'm primarily going to focus on here, there's the federal government has its hand in the whole thing. Okay. So as a result of that, if your First Nations member you have your parcel of land, you don't have the right to sell it. Okay. Technically, you shouldn't even be leasing it without the consent of the federal government. That's a technical thing, okay? Because we all know there's a lot of people on reserve who will lease out parcels of their land, okay? This is frequently called Bakshi leases, okay? Or handshake leases. They're usually more than a handshake. There's usually some paper involved, but a Bakshi lease is where you're dealing directly with the locatee, the person who's being assigned that land. I do not deal with them myself, and I'm going to start off by strongly recommending that none of you deal with them either. Okay. The reason for that is enforceability. Okay. As it's technically not a legal lease under the Indian Act, your ability to enforce on it if there was a breach by the locatee, the landlord, is extremely limited. And you're relying upon their good graces and their willingness to follow an agreement or contract with regards to the lease getting what you want out of the lease if you're the purchaser in this case, okay, or rentor. The problem with that is landlords can change over time. Either you could have the same landlord, but your relationship with the landlord could change and how they deal with you could change, or people don't live forever is the other aspect. And while you've been dealing with Jim so-and-so, who's been a great landlord and completely reliable, his son Steve is a complete jerk and is going to come in and just upend everything and wants to take your house because he's got some kids who are looking for a place to live. So he's canceling the lease and he's moving his kids into your house. Your ability to challenge that is limited, to say the least, okay? Because it's not a legal lease that you can enforce on, and it is their land, okay? So we've had very few issues with that, having said that this is the risk. I have one that spelled out last year where somebody passed away and his kids decided to take over the 4 cabins on the property and issued eviction notices to everybody, and they've all walked away from their houses. Okay, so uh, a lot of those people have been there for a while, might have got some value out of it, but if you had just purchased that lease a couple years ago and suddenly you're for a couple 100,000, and suddenly you're being told to leave and leave the house behind, you're probably not going to be too happy. Okay, and you have limited recourse in that situation as to what you can do with regards to it. Okay, so I don't deal with Bakshi leases because it is if I'm properly advising the purchaser, I'm telling them don't do it, run away. Okay. Uh, I have. Oh, I got Luke waving at me. Do you have a question, Luke? And you're muted, by the way.
Yes, right. Thank you. Yeah, I'm curious. I remember there being some story in the 90s. I think it might have been regarding this Bakshi lease thing, and people were willing to burn down their cabins rather than leave them or something. Do you have some history on that?
I've heard the stories. I don't have any firsthand knowledge. I've heard the stories of people burning their houses or driving a front loader through their house to tear it down, sort of thing. As opposed to leaving it behind. Um, Technically, in the Bakshi lease situation, you are renting illegally somewhat from the landlord the land, but you own your house. Now, if you have a mobile home on the property is registered in your name, or something that is at least semi-mobile, then yeah, pick it up, take it with you when you leave. Okay. Uh, my experience, most homes aren't all that mobile, even if they have the word mobile attached to them. Okay. So you're probably going to be leaving these things behind when you leave the land. Okay. Um, and I've got some situations. I have a friend, I have a couple friends who are out there who are on these Bakshi leases and have built these massive houses with foundations and the whole 9 yards. They ain't moving them anywhere, and they've just dropped $400,000 or so, $500,000 in building these houses. And they got a great house on the lake, but they're under these Bakshi leases. So if they were told that no, you're gone next month, sort of thing, they ain't taking it with them. So I would anticipate there might be a fire or something of that nature. Now, the problem with fire is you have arson charges potentially. So you're probably better off to just push it down if you can in some fashion if you don't want to leave it behind, or negotiate with the person who's evicting you of, look, this could happen, but if you want me to leave it behind, here's the solution. But you prefer not to have to get into that situation, so avoid buying on native land is my advice. I have got involved on the seller side a couple times, and the reason I have less of an issue on the seller side because is I'm getting them out of that situation. Okay, I'm getting them out of that risk position, so it's not there's not going to be any fallback on me. And on the flip side, if I'm on for the buyer and this were to happen, you got to know they're going to sue everybody who is being involved or touch this process at some point. Uh, the lawyers, the realtors, whatever. Okay. The people who sold them the house. Okay. You don't want to be involved. Okay. Now, you might also not be legally able as realtors to sell on that land for that reason. Okay. I have had a couple people times being approached with regards to doing a transfer in Bakshi leases. I've noticed there were realtors who were attached to it in some fashion. I don't know if they were attached in a formal capacity, but again, here's my first piece of advice. don't touch the buckshees, okay? Federal leases, which I'm going to focus on today, perfectly fine. Okay, I don't have a problem with those because you have enforceability clauses and some protection there, but not the buckshees. Okay, so that brings us to the other type of lease, the good leases. Okay, this is your federal leases. So under the Indian Act, the government can create a lease for a number of years with a locatee. This is the person who's being assigned the rights to that parcel of land uh, by the band or under the Indian Act. And so they can lease it to that individual or an entity associated with that individual. So usually they'll incorporate a company for this purpose. And they will have what we refer to as the head lease. Okay. Now, this will usually be something that's 40, 50 years long, where they have exclusive right to use the land and to lease it out themselves. Okay. And so this is what creates these developments such as Desert Cove, Parker Cove, Lawrence Heights, things like that. Okay. And so that is done through the federal government and the Indian Land Registry. Once the head lease is created, then they have subleases, which are to be approved by the Indian Land Registry and the federal government. And that's the subleases are what you would be dealing with your clients on either a sale or a purchase. It's the assignment of that sublease under the head lease. So some things to look at when you're dealing with Indian land, and the lease specifically I'm talking about, is if you're going to be doing this either as a purchaser or a seller, get a copy of the sublease. Okay. Have a look at it. The main terms you're looking at, okay, in there, we're going to be, first off, the length of the term. How long is this going for? Okay. This is relevant for a number of reasons, but financing is one of the primary ones, it seems, these days, where there's most of the time, most banks won't lend on it unless there is a term that exceeds the amortization of the loan. And so if you've got 15 years left on the lease, technically, it's going to be extended most likely, but then you're not going to get amortization more than 15 years. Okay. And so it's going to limit potentially the ability for somebody to sell it down the road, or it might limit your ability of your client, if they're buying, to get financing to buy the thing and be an additional issue for them. So have a look at how long it's going to last. Now, if sometimes you'll have a situation where you say, yes, it's supposed to come due in 2043, by God, an extension, it's going to be extended to 2056. It's most likely going to be extended to 2056, maybe, but you don't know on what terms, because they can change the terms for that extension if you wanted to. And secondly, the statement that they intend to do it, I would have a further look at the head lease at that point to see how long the head lease has been extended to, make sure that they have actually got approval for this. They usually will get approval if they ask for an extension. It's in everybody's best interest to extend them, but just make sure that if there's a promise that no, we're planning on extending it to a further term down the road, that they've actually taken some steps to do that, to give you some comfort that that's going to happen. You're also going to look at the lease amount. Okay, so you're a renter. Okay, you're renting the land. Okay, so again, with Indian land, you rent the land, but you own everything on top of it: the house, the fence, the sidewalk, whatever it is. You're going to own that, but the land itself is going to be leased. So you're going to find out how much you're paying, or your client would be paying, for that lease, and whether it's prepaid. Okay, a lot of these are prepaid. but not all of them are. You're going to have monthly rent or annual rent for some of these things. That's going to be relevant first off from a cash flow perspective, knowing if for your client, if you're buying, but also potentially from a financing perspective, in that a lot of lenders won't deal with a federal lease land unless it is prepaid. Okay, so again, it could limit your ability to sell down the road or limit your ability of your client to buy it to begin with. You're going to look for a rent escalation clause in there. Are they able to change the rent at any time? And if so, on what basis can they change the rent? The consumer price index is standard, and that's perfectly fine. You would expect them, if you're going to be renting for 50 years, that you're going to have some sort of inflationary clause. You don't want, if you're the landlord, you're not going to want to be stuck getting the same rent for 50 years with no ability to increase it. However, okay, you are going to want to make sure from a buyer's perspective that you're not going to get a nasty surprise where all of a sudden it's doubled or something like that of that nature. And again, that's another factor that CMHC and lenders will look for because they're concerned with the same thing. User fees or common area fees. So you'll have your lease for your portion of the land, but quite often there's going to be a common area fee or user fee or there, whatever name you want to call it, on top of it for common facilities and which could be like roads themselves or whatever. Okay. How much is that? What is the ability to increase that over time? How is it calculated? And all that should be set out in the sublease as to how that's going to be calculated. And it, properly speaking, if it's truly a user fee or a common area fee, it should be based on budgeted expenses, what they budget they're going to have for these things, and split proportionally amongst the available lots. If they don't have a calculation of that nature, that it ties it to the reality of what the expenses are and gives free rein to the landlord to make something up of that nature, then at that point, again, that's a bit of a warning flag and also probably would cause issues from a financing perspective for CMHC. Most of these places will have bylaws or rules, much like a mobile home park or something of that nature. Get a copy of those, read through them, make sure there's nothing unusual or strange. And even if it's not unusual or strange, it might not work for your client. So gonna get that out of the way first, because you don't want to go through this whole process and find out that, wait a second, I got 2 dogs, they only allow one. And then you've wasted all this time going through it until the end to get to find out that they're going to walk away because of an extra dog or something of that nature. Transfer out fees. Okay. This varies from development to development. What a transfer out or a sale fee or marketing fee, again, pick whatever made up description you're going to have of this. This is the fee that is paid usually by the seller of the property to the landlord on the sale of the property. And these can be substantial in some cases. Okay. I've seen upwards of 10%, I think was the highest I saw of the sale price. 5% is not unusual, 3.5%, those seem to be common. And if you're selling a $300,000 or $400,000 home, it adds up. Okay. And to a point where it might mean that purchasing there isn't the best option for your client if they're on a shortened timeline of expectation for how long they're going to actually live on the property. if they're on a 5-year plan, then get something that's going to take 5% off at the end of the term when they sell it. And on top of any realtor fees, they're pretty much guaranteed losing money overall in the process. So they should go in their eyes wide open, knowing that that's the case. If they've got, this is the house I'm going to die in, sort of mentality, I'm going to be here forever, less of an issue. Okay. But they should know, and you should know as a realtor, when as to what you're looking at as far as that's going to be concerned. Some places don't have these. Parker Cove is the prime example I would think of. They've got an administration fee of $350 or something like that. Okay. Which probably actually is their cost on it. So they don't charge a fee, and it's not because they're necessarily great people. They were just one of the early ones, and it never occurred to them when they did it, I think. And they're regretting it now. They're seeing all these other developments getting like $12,000 for their marketing fee, as Desert Cove likes to call it, on a sale of land, and thinking, okay, could have got that, but we're going to get 350 instead. So any newer developments coming in, guaranteed you're going to have some sort of fee of that nature, because it's a good cash cow for the landlord. And how much it's going to be is obviously going to be relevant to your client as a buyer on those lands, and is going to be relevant to their decision making when it comes to how long they plan on being there. Okay. Again, if they're going to be there for the next 15, 20 years, who cares? Probably at that point. But it doesn't lend itself to a short 5-year, and then we're going to be moving somewhere else plan. And then other financing considerations. If your client is going to be getting a mortgage on it, you're going to go through all those things I just listed with financing in mind, and you're going to make sure that you have a little bit of extra time maybe on your subjects for financing, because banks take a bit longer, my experience, with regards to approvals on Indian land. As they want to review the lease, sometimes they'll want to review the head lease, things like that. So it takes a bit longer. So when you're writing these things up, I appreciate the standard realtor mentality that I've experienced, that everybody wants things finishing tomorrow. But give it a little bit of extra time. Okay. Otherwise, everybody's going to be looking for extensions, and you're just creating more work for yourself. Okay.
Ed,
Okay. So,
Ed,
hey, Sarah.
hey, before you leave the sublease question, how do you get, if the sublease isn't available but from the seller, how do you get a hold of one?
You can order a copy from the Indian Land Registry if you have the ILR number for it. Okay. If now, I guess if you're dealing with an unrepresented seller, okay, which would be unusual, then you might have trouble getting it. If they're represented by a realtor, then that's the first job as a realtor. One of the first things as a realtor you're going to do is get a copy of that sublease. Okay, because that's one of the first things that anybody's going to want to see on the buyer side is, okay, and to confirm all those things I just listed, the lease amount, the term on it, rent escalation clauses, what the rules are of the, so get all that stuff if you're on for the buyer, because if you sorry on for the seller, because if you're on for a buyer, first thing you're going to request. Okay. And when you're going through this process of doing your due diligence.
You know,
okay. Yeah,
it's
you
funny
can get
because,
it from the Indian Land Registry
okay,
directly.
and you just put your credit card in, because it's not like LTSA, then that's super easy, but you have to order it and then they send it to you after a delay.
I have people for that, I have to admit.
Okay. Yeah.
So,
It's funny, I've just done 2 deals in Desert Cove and nobody actually had the sublease.
okay, I think if you're going to be representing somebody on a sale in Indian land, first thing you do is get the sublease. Okay. And I like I said, I haven't had an issue with order it myself. It's from the Indian Land Registry. Um,
You wouldn't happen to be able to
if I
share the
if
link?
I need it.
Would you be
Sorry?
able to share the link in the chat? Or does Anna, is it
I
easy to
can
find?
send it to Anna, who can share it with everybody who's on here. Okay. I'd have to look it up after. I'm going to make my note. Okay. The link for the Indian Land Registry for searches, essentially, you're looking for. Okay. And I presume that the email I got this MS Teams invite on was from Anna, was it? Yep. Okay. We'll send it back to you. Okay. Um, so the contractor purchase and sale. Again, for all this, I'm presuming we're dealing with federal lease land. Okay.
Excuse me, Ed, can I
You
just interrupt
have
for 1 second? Sorry,
okay,
can I just interrupt with a question?
Debbie, here we go. Okay.
Sorry about that.
You're moving around my
Is the
screen
sublease
also.
is the sublease
Right.
the same for every subleaser, whatever they're called there, or can it vary within one park?
It can vary within a park. Okay.
Okay.
And so you could have, it could be the only difference is they've extended the lease, for instance. So say before they were 2043 was the end date of the head lease and all the subleases were done that way. They've done an extension under the head lease to 2056 and they've brought new leases in place to extend subleases in place to extend to 2056. But you'll still have other people who are on 2043. Okay. So again, which of those two leases you're buying is going to be very relevant to you. Okay. But it doesn't just have to be the term that would change. They could change other things within it, such as the lease amount. They could have different rules with regards to construction, insurance requirements, things like that. Okay, so you could have a park where you've dealt with before, and you think, okay, yeah, I know their lease. Well, no, you might not because it might be a completely different lease. So look at it every single time. Okay, because you could have potentially meaningful differences from one lease to another at the same park. Okay. And if in doubt, call me or some other lawyer with regards to help with interpretation of things. Okay. And we can go through it with you. But yeah, no, there can be so good question. Okay. The contract of purchase and sale. So there is a specific realtor form that you will have. And I'm going to make my screen smaller here so I can see if I can find it. This is where I make the first failed attempt to share a screen with you. That is definitely not what I'm looking for. 1 second here. Minimize, minimize. There we go. So let's share screen. Well, there's an obvious button to press here, so let's try this. Okay. So 1 second here. I'm gonna get onto the right page off the start here. And see if I can find you people again. There you are. Okay, share screen. And I'm guessing the share button is where I'm going to go with this. Okay. And I'm sharing my screen. Okay. I'm getting thumbs up from Debbie. Okay, so I'm taking that as a positive sign. Okay, so this is the contract to purchase and sale of the leasehold interest in First Nations reserve land. Okay. Okay, so that is the form that you will be using for any sale. We'll use the term sale here. Technically, it's assignment of sublease, but sale of land on the reserve. Okay, now I'm presuming most of you have done real estate for a while here. You know, you've seen contracts before. It is not substantially different from your normal contract to purchase and sale. You're gonna have the parties, you're gonna have what you're offering, you're gonna have the time frames, you're gonna have the subjects and conditions. Okay. One of those subjects and conditions is always going to be the review of the sublease and the rules of the park. Okay. I would recommend having a legal advice clause in there to cover yourselves off. Okay, and again, give yourself that extra time for the financing approval. It's not going to be as fast as on, again, normal land. Okay, so with the contract for sale of First Nations land, the big difference you have comes down to the closing process and possession. Okay, and I'm moving you people over to the other side of my screen so I can skim down here. Okay, so well, I've shot right past it. Okay, so you have 2 dates for completion in a technical sense. Okay, you have the trust completion date and the final completion date. Okay, and you're saying, well, why would we need 2 dates? That's because you're dealing with the Indian Land Registry, and it is probably the most inefficient government registry that's ever been created. Okay, and that says something, really, in the scheme of government registries. It takes forever for them to actually process documents up there. And if you want to speak to a real person, well, bring a tent because you're going to be waiting for a while to get somebody live online that actually will answer questions. So because of that timeline and the inefficiencies and the fact that they deal with hard copies of everything, there's no digital registration of things. From the time you submit your assignment of sublease that everybody signed off on as being approved by the landlord, to the time it actually transfers title under the lease into the name of the new purchaser, it can be a substantial period of time. I waited up to a year before that happened in one case. And it's just sitting on somebody's desk in the meantime, waiting for them to have a look at it. Things slowed down considerably after or during the pandemic. Everybody started working from home. It did not help improve efficiencies on any level, regardless of what the public servants union says about working from home. I can advise from the Indian Lands Registry perspective, at the very least, it did not help because we went from waiting for 3-4 months for a response to 8 months up to a year. They are getting better. Okay, they are slowly improving, but it still takes 6 to 8 months quite often for us to get anything back from them after we submit it. So as a result, you've got those 2 completion dates. You got the date that everybody signs everything, sends it in, and has paid their money. Okay, which in a regular real estate transaction would be your normal completion date. And then you have the final completion date when you actually get registration. Okay, which could be sometime later and at an unknown time in the future, which you can't necessarily rely upon or schedule around because it's in somebody else's hands. Okay, so you have those 2 dates. Okay, and then that ties in with your paragraph 8 possession clause. And when does the person get possession of the house? When it actually finally completes and it's in their name, or do they get it when they've paid their money and everybody's exchanged the papers, which is what most people on the purchaser side are going to expect. Because hey, you've given them the money, why wouldn't you get possession of your house at that point as you see it? Okay. So that is if I'm going to say the area that causes the most issue for realtors is paragraph 8. Okay. So there's I'm going to say a right way and a wrong way of doing paragraph 8. Now, the wrong way isn't technically incorrect, but it adds a further layer of obligation on you, which is often missed by the realtors if they don't have experience with this. Okay. And that relates to taking a possession. So I'm just going to read it on my screen here. The buyer will have vacant possession at whatever time on the first day after the final completion date is the standard wording. Okay. So you get it at 8 o'clock a.m. one day after some indistinct time in the future, which could be months down the road. Okay. Not ideal for most purchasers who are going to want to actually move into their house. And it says notwithstanding the foregoing. So it's the notwithstanding clause here that could theoretically save them on this. Buyer will have vacant possession of the property on the first day after the trust completion date, which is when you want it. If either A, on or before the 10th day after acceptance of this contract by all parties, the buyers give written notice to the seller of its election to take possession at the earlier date, or thereafter the buyer and seller agree in writing that the buyer will take possession at the earlier date. So you have a 10-day window after that, theoretically, to give notice to the seller or the seller's agent that yes, we want to actually get possession after we've paid for the house on the trust completion date. If you forget to do that, then you're reliant upon them agreeing to give it up. And if you've got a seller who wants to be a jerk about it for some reason, then you could have a situation where your buyer can't actually move into their house for an indistinct period in the future. Okay. So if you leave the contract as is, make sure you diarize the hell out of that 10-day thing on your phone, because it could be very relevant. The other option you have, and 1 second. No, that didn't me. Okay, I gotta. Where am I here?
Hey, Ed, while you're looking for that, do they, on the Indian land, do they use the same Residential Tenancy Act? Do we have to follow the 3-month rule?
You have that. Yes and no. You'll have the Residential Tenancy Act is quite often the forms and stuff will be used on for your clients are the owner, the sublease holders are renting it out to somebody else. The Residential Tenancy Act is provincial legislation and you're on federal land. So it technically would not apply in that situation, would not be enforceable in that situation. So be wary of a lease of that nature. So I'm going to, 1 second, I've gone and done something here. 1 second, it's, how do I get this to be much bigger? Actually, I'm going to move it across here. Okay. There we go. At least I can see it now. If nobody else can. Okay, so this is the other way of going about it, and I don't know if I'm cutting off my screen somewhat here. There we go. That's what I'm trying to do. This is an example of an amended one, okay? And that I would recommend doing just to take out any confusion on it, make sure it's clarified. So a lot of times people, when they give possession, they don't say 1 day after, so they give a specific date. Okay, that you'll get possession on this date, which is gonna be 1 day after the trust completion date. And they've specifically taken the word final out and put the word trust in. Just to make sure that's clear. Okay. And then quite often that notwithstanding paragraph there is crossed out because it's largely irrelevant at that point if you just made it clear that, yes, they're going to get possession on this date, which is 1 day after the trust completion date. Okay. Now, this is the one paragraph that causes the most consternation amongst realtors, my experience. I would just turn your mind to that. The change I'm showing you on the screen, possibly with the addition of crossing out the whole notwithstanding paragraph, is probably advisable. Okay. Okay. If they're getting financing, the reference to the gap coverage there, okay, that's something that your lender is going to require is title insurance on this, which includes gap coverage. The gap coverage is the period covering the period of time between the trust completion and the final completion. If something were to happen, they're still covered off for those issues during that time also, even though technically they're not on title as the leaseholder at the Indian Land Registry. Okay. Stop sharing. Let's go back. Okay. Okay. I don't think I'm sharing anymore. There we go. I'm back. So that's sort of the big one I wanted to point out. Now, after you've got it signed, you've removed your subjects, it's landed at my office. The process on at that point is we get the assignment of sublease document. That's usually prepared by the developer or developer's lawyer, as the case may be. It's a standard form that's used. Everybody gets signed off on it. The regular closing process isn't substantially different from regular land. Except at the end of the day, we have a sublease that needs to get registered as opposed to a Form A transfer that you'd have on proper real estate. And so that assignment of sublease needs to get submitted, it has to be signed off by the landlord and then submitted to the Indian Land Registry. Most places, the landlord is the one that submits it themselves. Some places will require that somebody deliver the signed assignment of sublease to the landlord. In which case you might be making a trip out to the reserve on the day of. So just keep that in mind that you might have to do a delivery on the day of closing to get this assignment of sublease to the landlord before you can expect that the trust completion is considered completed. After that, it goes to the Indian Land Registry. Then you've already got my warnings about the inefficiencies at the Indian Land Registry. It's going to sit there. Okay. Warn your clients of this beforehand. I warn everybody when they come in, they do the purchase. I have a standard written cover my ass letter on this saying, look, I'm sending it up. There's only, but once it leaves the office, there's very little I can do to speed this up. And the main thing they're going to see is if taxes. Tax notices are sent to the registered owner on title. Okay. You could have a situation where the person who sold their house is still registered on title, and therefore they're the ones that get the tax notice. So you warn your sellers that, hey, you might get a tax notice next year for this property. Don't pay it. Okay. Warn your buyers that they might not get a tax notice, but they're still obligated to pay it. So they're going to have to get something from their landlord confirming that they have submitted this assignment of sublease, that they're living there, get the the legal description for tax purposes, and go down to Services BC to get so they can pay their taxes on this property. Okay, so that they don't inadvertently go in arrears because they didn't get a notice that taxes were due or how much they were. Okay, and that's the big thing with regards to this. Now, they might also have a situation where they have to prove to somebody that they actually own this property in the meantime, and they can't pull an Indian land registry search to show that they're the registered leaseholder. Okay, that's sometimes that's cropped up once or twice, and we had to get something from the landlord, a sworn statement to the extent that this is what's happening, and that they're going to be the registered owner, but they are the beneficial owner at this time. It creates some issues, but just keep that in mind and warn your clients in advance with regards to it, or else you'll be getting phone calls of why the hell is this in so and so's name still? What did I pay you guys for? Okay, these previous people still own it, stuff like that. Okay, having received a few of those in the past, when we first started doing this, I've learned to warn everybody and hand out that little piece of paper and have them sign off on it, so that if I do get a phone call, I can point to them where I said that to them and how they got a little note warning them that this is going to be the case. Okay. I think that covers off what I wanted to talk about, and I think you gave me an hour, and I've used most of it up here. I'm going to open up to any questions that people may have with regards to this.
I have a couple.
Okay, Jeff.
So I'm in Kelowna, so I deal with a lot of West Kelowna leasehold land, which a couple things. West Side First Nations are phenomenal to work with. They're very easy, so it's like basically doing a regular transaction. But I question a lot of the stuff that I do with the parks, in the sense that we have some places that lease renewals are running low, like they're under 25 years left. What typically happens, and I'm trying to advise clients because obviously there's a good deal to be had. There is a plan to probably renegotiate a lease, but what does that look like for someone that's buying into, say, a trailer park where the lease has 15 years left? How do you advise your client what that will look like for them when the lease needs to be renewed?
Okay, a couple of things. First off, touching on the West Bank thing. So under the Indian Act, okay, you have the Indian Land Registry, which is the general federal one across Canada. But they have the ability, bands have the ability to create their own land title registry for leases. And West Bank has done that. And they have their own registry system. So if you're doing something on West Kelowna, West Bank First Nation, that's the registry you'd be getting stuff from. And as Jeff said, it's a much better registry than the federal one. Okay, much easier to deal with. Okay, and much faster to deal with. Okay, but we don't see a lot of it out in Vernon. Okay, we're dealing mostly with stuff on the Okanagan Indian Band out here. Going back to, okay, what do you do when you got a shortened lease term left here? You warn the client. Okay, now generally speaking, if you look at practically, it's from the landlord's best interest, generally speaking, to extend these leases. Okay, this is how they make their money, is by collecting rent from people. And so, and if they were to not extend it and then tell everybody to move off and then try to do something else with the property, it's not going to inspire a lot of confidence with new people to deal with this person, because they just screwed over however many other people on the previous lease. So like I said, I haven't seen a situation where it hasn't been extended by the landlord, but that is a possibility. If they were intending to extend it, you would expect to see it in the head lease. Okay, it's the first step in the process for a landlord to do an extension is to extend the head lease itself. And then you work on the subleases below it. So if the head lease is being extended to some date in the future, that's some point of confidence that yes, the main lease has been extended. And so they're in the process. But then you got to look at the sublease, because you could get an offer this for extending the sublease, but then the offer for the renewal of that sublease, the extension itself, might be on terms that are unacceptable to your client. They could completely jack up the lease amount. They could change rules or terms in the lease itself. So you don't know what you're going to get. So you got to warn them that, yes, it's probably going to be extended, but you're not going to know until you get that extension and as to what terms are going to be. So you got to make sure you give them that caveat, okay? And make sure that that if it doesn't get extended, they're fine with the 2043 or whatever the term is that's left on this lease as it stands right now. Because if they don't agree to that extension, if one is offered, that's all they got. And they're going to have to sell to somebody else who might be willing to accept the terms that are being offered on the new lease. So it's until you actually have that new lease in place, nothing's guaranteed. They're not obligated to give you an extension.
What's the likelihood, and this is one question, is that obviously if they extend the lease, they could change the rent base there, but is there also a monetary fee that they'd have to pay, like a 20 to extend, you have to pay $20,000 or whatever it is for the duration of, say,
extension
15 years?
fee. They can if they want, okay, because they're not obligated to give you that extension. So if they want to charge you a fee for extending it, okay, a processing fee, an extension fee, make up whatever description you want for a fee, they can ask for it. Now, so whether they get buy-in or not is another question. I've had a recent one where I rewrote a lease for one of the local developers, a lease extension, and the terms that they put forth financially went over like a lead balloon, so nobody bought into it. So we're working on, okay, which I knew at the time when they were making it, I think, no, don't do that, don't do it. But we're the second attempt to sell and on different terms and approaching them is in process right now. But that's like I say, you'll see at the time, I guess, when it goes over as to what it's going, if there's going to be a fee or not, and how much it is. But I would you can expect that there's a distinct possibility. Anybody else?
I have questions always. So hi Ed. The form that you showed us said park approval or like approval not needed, but most of the ones around do need approval. So we also have another form that or another contract, which is probably what you see a lot, especially for Parker Cove, where the Parker Cove does have to give third-party approval.
Yeah.
And then
yeah, sorry, I that's the one I grabbed. I just happened to have it on there, but yes, you got the two forms.
yeah, no worries. And then the other, well, I have a couple other things, but one is what would happen if they didn't approve or they didn't extend the lease and it expired? And do the leasees owe the leaseor the cost of fair market value of the home that's on the land? Like, is that something that we could tell our clients or no?
If it's in the sublease. So you'll have a section in the sublease for end of term. What happens at that point? And either there could be a requirement in there saying that the lessees are going to return the land to its original condition as it was prior to the lease. Okay, or it could say that they are to leave it as is at the end of the lease, or something of that nature. So it's in the wording for your end of lease section in that in your sublease. Okay, as to what the expectation is. But it would be rare for there to be something saying that the landlord is going to compensate you for the value of your land you're walking away from, or your house that you're walking away from. Now,
That would be
again, they probably might prefer to do that versus having you bulldoze it, okay, or set it ablaze, okay? But at the same time, like I said, it depends what they want to do with the land. If they're planning on returning the land to its original condition, or if they're looking to do some sort of commercial venture on the land instead, or something of that nature, they might not care if you take the house down.
Okay, and then does the sublease always reference the length of time left on the head lease? Like how important is it for us to see both?
It references the head lease, but it doesn't reference the length of time on the head lease. It'll have its own term for the sublease. Now, that term for the sublease can't be longer than the head lease. Okay. So you could have a head lease that goes to, again, 2056 to use an example, but your sublease only goes to 2043 because that was the original term of the head lease. Head lease is being extended, but the sublease hasn't yet. Okay. So you could have two different terms, but you're never going to have a sublease that extends longer than the head lease.
And obviously, if it would be very important for us to know the head lease too, because if the head lease is far out, your sublease is most likely to be extended. But if the head lease is short, there's a lot of renegotiating.
That is
to
the
go.
expectation. Yeah, that is the expectation why they would have extended the head leases, because they're planning on extending all of these things and they've got long-term plans with regards to the property. Okay.
And
But
is
again,
there,
until your sublease is extended, don't take it for granted.
totally. And would there be a cost to a subleasee to extend the head lease?
No. Well, there shouldn't be. I haven't ever seen that situation. I guess like it depends on how creative your landlord is with regards to these things, and what they determine to be common area fees or something like that as to what they want to try to include. But that is something that should be purely on the landlord to look after, as the extension of the head lease. I'm sure they can find creative ways to recoup their costs through the extension fees on their subleases and stuff like that.
And then my last question is, how much control does the federal government have over that versus the bands, over the process of everything?
Well, it's the federal government that manages it. The band doesn't have a lot of say after the head lease is created, really. So it's more federal government than band, I would say, as far as influence is concerned here. The band will have some influence still with regards to things like fire services and things like that are going to be relevant to those leased areas. But the leases themselves are purely under the federal government's purview at that point.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Oh, Luke, are you waving? Or are you scratching?
I was adjusting glasses, but I do kind of think I'm super terrified to deal with any of this stuff. I mean, after hearing all this stuff, I don't even know, like I may have a listing coming up here in Desert Cove. And I'm wondering if I should just refer it. But I'm willing to learn. Okay. What was that, Ed?
My goal today was to scare you a little bit.
Success.
But not scare you away necessarily.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Well, I'm willing to learn. I'm just really curious, and I don't. Yeah, we'll see.
Like I said, let's use the example of buck-she leases. I don't touch them. Okay, I tell people, anybody who asks me about them, don't touch them. Okay, I am unequivocal on my advice to purchasers with regards to buck-she leases of don't do it. Okay. Good percentage of people just ignore my advice on that because it's cheap and they want a place out there. Their decision. I've given them their warnings. I don't have that issue though with the federal ones, because you have enforceability you have a package of rights which is federally protected. You have a process through the federal courts to enforce your rights with regards to this lease. Okay, so As long as the terms of the lease themselves are acceptable, you're good. Okay, because that's what you're going to be relying upon. You're acquiring a package of rights with regards to the usage of that land. Okay, so just make sure you're satisfied what that package of rights is. Okay, but if you're not satisfied with the lease terms, that's when you give the advice of maybe this isn't for you. Okay, let's look elsewhere. See if there's something else that has better package of rights that more suits you, or a better term, or a better lease amount, or whatever that's going to be. Okay. But as long as you're satisfied with the lease that you're entering into, or you're having assigned onto you, then you're fine as far as I'm concerned. You have the enforceability under the federal courts with regards to that, your package of rights you've signed on to, versus the bucksheet, in which case you're just going on the goodwill of your landlord. Again, his goodwill or her goodwill could change, or the landlord could change. And you have situations. Again, and on the bucksheet, it's pretty rare, okay, but it can happen, and it has happened. And I just had one last year. This is the first one I've had in 20 years, I think, where it's come to me where a landlord, he passed away, his kids got the land left to them, and there's eviction notices to 4 houses. And like the couple I was talking to with regards to it, they had a house that they purchased for, I think, $350 a number of years ago. And it was a big house. Okay. They got a great price for it if they were buying regular land, but they're walking away from it. They're just abandoning the house and moving elsewhere now. And so it's being left behind. So it does happen. Like I said, that was the first time in 20 years that I had personally had involvement with that situation happening. But again, there's an example of what could happen. Okay, so avoid bucksheet. Federal, fill your boots. Just be careful. Make sure you do the reading. And if in doubt, give me a call or another lawyer who deals with Indian land. Anybody else?
Yeah, it looks like
If
Morgan
anybody,
has
oh, sorry.
it looks like Morgan has a question, but she doesn't have her video on. So you
Okay.
might not see her in there.
Hi.
I do not see Morgan. There you are. Oh, is that what the little hand means?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I was unfamiliar with that. Okay.
What if you are
Hi.
selling on behalf of a like as a listing agent for Bakshi? Is there anything additional you have to do to cover your ass per se? Because technically any buyer's agent would have to advise the buyer of the risks and all that. But in terms of the seller or the agent of the seller not getting sued, is there anything additional that you would advise disclosing other than the general risks of purchasing a Bakshi lease?
You may want to avoid it to begin with, even on a seller side. Like in theory, you're getting them out of a risky situation, so you're actually improving your client's position in this. So your client's not going to sue you. It's the other side who sues everybody involved. So your main position as the seller's agent in that situation is going to be making sure that you have made full disclosure. Okay. And essentially state over and over again in your documentation, whatever you're going to have here, that this is not a federally registered lease, that this is a lease purely with this individual. It is not under the Indian Act, and advise them that they need to get independent legal advice on the other side with regards to their rights and the risks involved in this transaction. Okay. I would just throw forth whatever language of that nature you can. And your client might not be too crazy about it because it's going to sound like you're trying to scare off the purchaser. But you got to cover your butt on this also, because even if the main claim would be theoretically against by the buyer against their own realtor in this situation, if there was one. They're going to name everybody, and they're going to be coming after you specifically with regards to a failure to materially disclose the risks. And it might be a bit of a risk, but a bit of a reach, but why would you want to even have that as a possibility or a potential issue down the road? Okay.
Okay,
My advice is to just steer clear of that stuff.
sure.
Because
And then
it's 'cause
I
I'm
just
hungry.
have one more question about the contracts. I've had a couple contracts come in for the Parker Cove where they have needs third party approval. Who is technically that third party approval? I'm not sure if you mentioned that, so sorry if I missed it. And also, if a buyer does submit that, is it just better off for our sake and your guys' sake for less work to get them to resubmit it on the other document that says does not need third party approval?
Well, some of them do need third party approval. Okay, I got Parker Cove as an example. Okay, so and I did mention this, so you didn't miss anything. So when we submit the lease to the Indian Lands Registry, you get both sides have signed off on it. And then you have a consent to assignment signed by Parker Cove Management. Okay. So it's who is the landlord out there who is saying, yes, we consent to this, they send it in. It is a term of their lease, okay, that any assignment requires their consent, which cannot be unreasonably refused. Okay. Now, it's a question of what is reasonable if they're going to refuse it. And that's, we've found out is lately somewhat eye of the beholder with Parker Cove Management, for instance. They have instituted Parker Cove. Let's just talk about Parker Cove specifically here as a good example. When they first started up many years ago, it was Reynolds Bono was one of the first guys. Reynolds, easygoing guy, very much laissez-faire management approach. Yeah, we had rules, don't worry about them so much. We're all getting along. And so they sort of ignored things, let people do their own thing. Everybody was happy. Okay, and that works up to a certain size of a community. It has grown to being a small town out there, so it wasn't necessarily working so much, and they wanted to enforce on the rules. And so Reynolds' son, Jimmy, took over, and he became taking the hard line. He became the bad guy because he suddenly starts enforcing the rules that everybody agreed to, but were never enforced before. And so one of those rules was with regards to, they have rules with regards to conformity of housing, that setbacks, types of buildings you're allowed, how you're allowed to build out there. And again, people were just throwing whatever they wanted out there. Reynolds was fine with it, but then Jimmy stepped in and said, okay, for instance, okay, yes, if you want to sell, your shed is encroaching on the property line, you got to tear down your shed or move it 3 feet over to the left. Okay. And so they'll have an inspection that they need to do. If you pass the inspection, you got a conforming property, they sign off on it. And it's usually not an issue, but where you get it is sometimes where you have a whole house that's encroaching on it, then you got to figure, okay, what are we going to do with this? Okay. And they might be refusing to transfer it until you fix the issue. Okay. Now, there's legal issues on Parker Cove's side with regards to the ability to enforce on these rules if they've approved transfers in the past that had of this property that had the same deficiencies. But that's a question for a federal court if anybody actually wants to take it to that level. But that's an example of where they might refuse to grant a consent to an assignment if they feel that it's a non-complying property of some sort. Okay, if you're in breach of the lease and that breach would in theory, continue to the new owner, then they won't agree to the assignment. Now, sometimes the assignment will cure the breach in that they know they're going to get paid off if it's a monetary thing. But it wouldn't cure the breach if the underlying breach is the property itself and what use you've made of it in the meantime. Okay. Or if they have a clear statement from the new owners as to what use the new owners want to make of it, that would be non-compliant. Okay. I don't know if that answered the question.
Yeah, thank
From
you.
the silence, I'll take it. Okay. Anybody else? Rick, were you waving at me there, or are you just moving your hand? Okay, you're good. Oh, thumbs up. Okay. Okay. If anybody has questions about this sort of stuff, okay. I appreciate people like Luke might be a little bit scared by this and stuff like that. Which case I might have overshot the mark technically a little bit on this, but feel free to give me a call. Okay. And just say, hey, Ed, here's the situation. What's your thoughts on this? Da, 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 da. Okay. And unlike a lot of people, I respond better to phone calls quite often than I do to emails. I'm happy to talk to anybody about this stuff anytime you want to. Okay.
Thanks, Ed. I've added you to my phone because I'll definitely need to give you a call.
Okay. I'm going to send Anna that link. When I say I mean I in the royal sense of somebody from my office, probably Haley,
Yeah.
who's my Indian land conveyancer here. The search for the link for the search is at Indian Land Registry, and maybe a quick overview, write up as to what our process is. Again, I got people that do that, so I can't really claim any knowledge myself as to how it's all magic that happens in the background for me. Okay.
Thank you so much, Ed.
Thank you, Ed.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ed.
Okay.
Appreciate
If
it.
you have questions though, honestly, give me a call. Okay. Nice seeing everybody this morning.
Right.